What's going on, everyone? Episode 65 of Poppitt's Corner. It brings me great pleasure to go up north today to the Bay Area with Josh, I think it's pronounced Branum, of Fog of War. How are you doing today, sir?
I couldn't be better. I'm doing a lot better now. I get to talk to you, Tanner.
Always a pleasure, my friend. I think the last time we spoke, or at least saw each other, was maybe 2015? Maybe?
Yeah, that sounds about right. We had a good time, too, last I remember.
Either 15 or 16, I believe, in the Bay Area, of all places, actually. So in your hometown, I believe we played, what was it, Condition Critical and Game Over and Us and You Guys, I believe?
Yeah, that was in San Jose.
Right. So not really your area, but, somewhat of your area. But, yeah, no, man, how you been since then?
Doing good, man. Just keeping up with music in as many ways as I can. But it's always going to be a thing, so I'm always doing it.
Were you? Are you still? I should say, were you? Like obviously still working out and stuff. That's kind of like your new thing, if I'm not mistaken. Correct?
Yeah, I'm kind of a serial dabbler, though. I went from powerlifting to like endurance running, and now I'm on to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I don't know. It's always going to be something. I always like to, keep moving.
That's awesome, man. It's like I said, it's great to hear your voice, man. The basis of the show is I'm going to go through your entire career, and hopefully you can help me fill in the gaps where I'm lacking. And if you're ready, man,
Sure.
I would love to get started.
Yeah, let's do it, bud.
So I would like, and I always start off each of my shows and saying this question where, give me your first recollection of hearing music for the first time.
Oh, absolutely. I've got actually probably more of a vivid and specific answer than you'd be expecting. And I kind of take the long way around of explaining things, so bear with me. But when I was a kid, my mom was dating this guy who was a really awesome musician who was really into like guitar virtuoso stuff and 70s prog and stuff like that. And my first memory of music is Cliffs of Dover by Eric Johnson. And I could just remember really grabbing on to that. It's almost like, the hook of the song, that whole thing. And I used to ask him to play that song over and over and over. He would either play it on the stereo or on his guitar or whatever, but I was obsessed with Cliffs of Dover. And kind of eventually, pretty much all of that record, Obby and Musicom. What's that other song, like Desert Rose? And there were a bunch of really great guitar songs on that album, but that was definitely the first song that I really just grabbed onto.
Now, why was that? Was it the actual tone of the guitar itself, or was it the full kind of spectrum of I guess the whole band per se? Was it the riff?
It was that melody. It was the melody, and I mean, if you've heard that album, the production on it is terrific. But so I mean, it was a pretty accessible album. I mean, I must have been about 5 years old, maybe, and ever since then, I had started to pay attention to music more and more and more. So something in that song, I think it was the melody, because that melody is so timeless and, unlike, I think, a lot of iconic melodies, it's not simple. So I really enjoyed listening to it and trying to kind of memorize it in my own mind and kind of hum it and stuff like that. And I just got really into that whole hook in that song.
Now, what were some of the other bands you were kind of listening to, I guess, after that? After you heard, obviously, Cliffs of Dover, were there any other bands that you kind of, like, were trying to... Obviously, you're trying to find bands that kind of sounded like that specific song or record. Did you find any of it? Like, what were you listening to, I guess, immediately kind of after that whole period?
Well, as a kid, and I mean, I might be dating myself here, but I mean, I'm going to be 35 this year. There wasn't really a whole lot a single kid could do to find any specific music back then. But I was fortunate enough to have just a lot of music in the household, and I grew up with bands like the Allman Brothers Band, Doobie Brothers, Leonard Skinner, a lot of Southern rock stuff, ZZ Top, obviously, Chicago, some horn stuff. I was really into those types of bands, but as I got older, I got one year for Christmas, I got this like tape deck, and I didn't have any tapes necessarily to play on it. I don't even remember who gave it to me or why, but it was like a kid's like red and yellow and blue tape deck. And I figured out pretty quick that you could record your own stuff on it. So, I was always trying to goof off and make people laugh as a kid. So I would record, things I thought were funny or whatever. And one day I was watching TV, and I realized that like all these cool pieces of music that I might hear in shows or commercials, and at the time I didn't know that they were, hard rock or heavy metal-ish or whatever, I would write down on this piece of paper what the episode was about, so I knew to go get my tape recorder, and I would record these like metal parts off of shows and commercials and stuff like that, so I could listen to them later. And I didn't know that there was a whole genre of music like that, and it was really frustrating. So like video games were a big source of that for me too. I would record the music playing on video games and stuff, and specifically I remember an episode of Rocko's Modern Life where it's like if you remember the show, Heifer gets in the car and he starts driving real fast to go do something, and there's just this great dun, 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 and I thought it was the greatest thing ever. It was just someone, down picking an E string,
Yes.
to a bat, bat, and it was the greatest thing I'd ever heard, and I recorded it and I listened to it just all the time because I thought it was just the coolest thing ever. And obviously later on I figured out what it was.
Well, I do remember that episode. That was I think season 1 or season 2 of that show. Oh man, you bring me back. He was going like kind of downhill kind of thing, and that song was playing. I do remember that for some reason.
Yeah, man. No, it's just this, and it really, the funniest part is how, you don't really need a lot more than that to really capture the spirit of the whole thing. Just those open notes and a boom boom bap kind of drum beat. That really kind of captures the spirit of it. So that was the best part. It wasn't even really necessarily like a joke or kind of a rib on the whole genre. It was pretty legit. I loved it.
Now, does that take you back? Obviously, there plays some nostalgia in it. When you were first getting into like, I guess the more extreme styles, and did it like kind of take you back? You're always trying to search for that specific moment again when you first heard the down picking with in cartoons per se in your childhood kind of thing.
Yeah, man, it was. That, and obviously a lot of the older cartoons used a lot of classical music, so you would hear heavy stuff, Night on Bald Mountain, or Barber of Seville. Things like that had kind of a heavy feel to them. So it was kind of something I only really realized later on. Obviously, anyone who's been listening to metal or playing music for any length of time can draw kind of a connection between metal and classical in a way. And so a lot of that was there too. But it definitely takes me back, man. The 90s were a fun time to grow up, and being able to explore all the music that was going on now as an adult. That's one of my guilty secrets is like 90s, like alternative rock and stuff is just, it's great. Awesome stuff. Great time to grow up.
Absolutely, man. I was there too. It was kind of a magical time, at least for cartoons though. Like cartoons were a big fucking deal, But I remember, like, obviously you had SpongeBob that played more of the metal tracks, and Invader Zim was kind of a darker thing, but they still had, like, more rock kind of based stuff. So, yeah, you're right. Cartoons kind of played a huge role, at least in my growing up, too, in terms of the heavier kind of styles of music.
Well, in cartoons, my favorite of all time was definitely Ren and Stimpy, and it might not have had the heaviest music in it, but the imagery and the psychological, like torment that Ren experiences. And, I don't know, that whole thing was, you could probably do a concept album on that show and have it be one of the darkest things anyone's ever recorded.
Absolutely, dude. And especially with video games, which was so prominent in the 90s too. Did that ever play a part in your upbringing for discovering heavier music?
Oh yeah, man. A lot of the fighting games that were coming out of Japan, like Virtua Fighter, Pit Vipers, and then the mashup they did with Fighters Mega Mix, it had like pretty much exclusively, music that could be described as metal. For the time period, it was a little groovy, I guess, but that was sort of the fashion at the time for metal anyway. But video games, most of them back in the day had an option to go into or you could go into the options, and a lot of them had jukeboxes, and you could listen to the soundtrack. So by the time I had gotten this terrible console that died pretty quick, the Sega Saturn, I would use that kind of as my own jukebox with a bunch of fighting games and stuff all the time.
Love it. Well, let's move ahead real quick. Obviously, after like the 90s period, when did you discover that you wanted to kind of pick up an instrument? Like, what was the next step from obviously listening to like more of the classic stuff to getting into some of the heavier bands? Actually, let's start there. Some of the heavier bands were what for you?
So I first heard Kill 'Em All when I was about 12 years old. And again, I kind of didn't expand on it and thought it was just sort of this miraculous thing that exists on its own in space. And so I kind of heard that. And then, a year or two later, I don't really quite remember, I found out, Metallica did more than one record and got the Black Album. So I jumped from, the first one to the fifth one. And kind of from there, before I even got a real good foundation in like the big four or whatever, I ran into bands like Nuclear Assault and Napalm Death kind of before I did, Anthrax and Slayer and Megadeth. So I really grabbed on to those because they were so extreme in terms of where they went with their sound. I remember specifically Twist the Knife by Napalm Death. That was really, really life-changing for me in that that was when, we started downloading MP3s and stuff, and I'd put it on a CD and I went and showed people. I was like, you have to hear this kind of a thing. And, most people didn't really like it. I have no idea why, but Twist the Knife by Napalm Death, that was when I realized that I wanted to do something like that. And you could pretty much say that song and Kill 'Em All are what drove an instrument into my hands.
Now, what about Napalm Death kind of did it for you? Was it the heavier style of guitars? Did it? Obviously, it was a step up from so you were listening to obviously the Rocco bit, right? And then Kill 'Em All, and then this. So it's just a gradual transition into the heavier styles. But I'm wondering, what about that specific song or band kind of did it for you?
That was the first time I'd ever heard any kind of guttural, I wouldn't really call Barney Greenway even growling. It's just more like guttural shouting. And I just thought it was so cool how it was so pissed off. Because Kill 'Em All is mean, it's fast, it's loud, it's got the solos and everything. But I heard Napalm Death and it was just so pissed. And the band's politics have always had a pretty angry message behind it anyway. So maybe I was picking up on that too. But, and the down-tuned guitars and that snare that was kind of tuned above the rest of the kit. The whole thing, it was that bit after there's a break in the song and the guitars are going, dun, 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 and then you hear this lone snare, rim shot into a roll. And then it goes into this just heavy, heavy riff. And I was hooked, and I started looking for anything I could find like that, and to be honest, Napalm Death is still definitely my favorite grind band today.
Oh, yeah. But everybody I interview, they all have this defining moment, and it's really awesome to get. I mean, we all kind of relate in that aspect where we all have a defining moment, and it's some of us are like me, discovering death for the first time, hearing Leprosy, and just being blown away, and then obviously yours was Napalm Death, so it's like there's a real like relatability to like all the heavier bands, and all the interviews that I'm have conducted of kind of proving that to me. So it's just awesome to hear you say like, this is what I want to do kind of thing after hearing that specific track.
Oh, totally, man. I mean, I have my own personal theory that musicians are born, not made, and there's something that has to kind of activate them, and it's just sort of one of those things. You just have to be in the right place at the right time and have that magic switch go off, and then you can't imagine doing anything else besides adding to that the awesome energy that comes from it. You just want to be able to contribute to it, and it's any musician knows it's tough to feel validated in your own music. We're always our own worst critic, but it's kind of a never-ending pursuit.
Absolutely. That's great because we're all too close to our own stuff, and I'm guilty of it as well. And I want to know too, real quick, when did you discover this? Age like what? Early teens, late teens?
When I decided I needed to play.
No, discovering Napalm Death and discovering like this is what I want to do.
Oh, okay. I was about 14, maybe 15.
Okay, so see, we all share that characteristic too, where we're all like in our early teens to late teens and discovering, that specific moment. That's fucking awesome. Let's move forward real quick, and I would like to know like kind of what was the defining moment for you to pick up a guitar, and I guess why a guitar and not a bass or a drums or just being a singer or being a keyboardist or anything of that nature?
For me, it was hearing a band like Napalm Death just kind of it made me curious about everything else that was out there. But admittedly, I knew that I wanted to play stuff like that I had heard on Kill 'Em All. So my initial goal, I wanted to get a guitar, and I wanted to be able to play Kill 'Em All start to finish on rhythm. Anyway, obviously I couldn't play those leads for a while, but so that was. And I've always been somebody who starts with a goal. I can never really just enjoy things, and that's my own problem. I'm really bad at just relaxing and enjoying something. So the goal was play Kill 'Em All start to finish, along with the album. So when I was about 15, I think that's when I got my first guitar, and it was this awful like Strat piece of garbage that I feel bad. My grandma got it for me, and she got just completely fleeced by this. It was still a mom and pop store, so that was good. But knowing what I know now about instruments, man, and being that things were a lot cheaper back then, she ended up paying like $250 for this just total garbage. Like we're talking worse than, Squire made a better guitar than this thing. So it was something else. It was this bright, glittery green pearl pickguard, just monstrosity. It looked like a frog. And but I learned to play Kill 'Em All on this thing, and that was kind of my first real go at playing. I needed to play those crunchy, fast riffs, and bass and drums. I picked up bass and drums for other projects later on anyway, but initially I had to do guitar. I had to be able to get that. Just playing an open E, man, that was just like the greatest thing ever to me.
Now, did you have an amp around this time, or was it just the guitar?
Oh no, I got an 8-watt custom, little tiny. Yeah, man, 8 watts. This little tiny practice amp.
Is that something you put on your belt? Is that one of those belt ones, or is that like a standalone? Like, I guess it is a standalone.
No,
It'd
it
be too
was
big to have on your belt.
Yeah, it was a standalone, but I mean, I could put it on my belt now, maybe, but not when I was 15.
Well, that's awesome. Do you still have these specific instruments at all, just as like a momentum kind of thing?
It's one of those things. I've never been a sentimental guy. I really move on. I don't really keep a whole lot. Fortunately, I've always kind of been around people who do it for me. If it wasn't for a lot of friends and bandmates, I wouldn't have any, material history of much of anything that I've ever done.
That's okay. I mean, I was just curious as to one musician to another, but anyway, let's move on. So after getting your guitar and learning all of Kill 'Em All and stuff, and achieving kind of that specific goal, what was next for you?
From there, I had to create my own music. Once I had been able to keep up with Kill 'Em All, I decided that's when I needed to start writing my own stuff. And despite being able to play Kill 'Em All, it's definitely a very different thing to try to write something as good as that when you're a new musician. And that was, and I definitely did not come close at all in my earliest efforts. But after, being able to keep up with Kill 'Em All, I started listening to more stuff, and it kind of did set a trend for me. To this day, I really don't know many other artists' songs. Like I'm no good for a campfire. I might be able to play a couple things, but I really don't know a whole lot of songs. I've been pretty much focused on writing my own music since then.
I can relate. I'm one of those people too. I'm a studio musician and not a I couldn't do a guitar clinic to save my life, I don't think. you know what I mean? So
dude, yeah.
But anyway, so I guess what was the climate around this specific era, right? So you had gotten your guitar. Did you start noticing, and obviously you were writing your own stuff, but did you start noticing other musicians around you at, say, high school or something, or middle school, or like where was the next step or whatever? Like, did you start noticing more bands?
So I hated school when I was younger, and I had convinced my parents to let me homeschool, and it was it had just recently become something you could do online. So I was kind of in sort of the first wave of online homeschool. So I got to just sit around and play guitar. School was never hard necessarily. I just didn't want to be there, and I didn't want to do it. And homeschool gave me a chance to just sort of knock out an entire day's worth of work in like 3 hours. And I could spend the rest of the day playing guitar and stuff. So fortunately, by then I had made some good friends, one of whom also started playing guitar, but quickly became interested in bass because he got really inspired by Les Claypool's projects. So he picked up a bass, and he and I kind of, found that our musical tastes never really completely were on the same page, but we liked heavier music, and we just started jamming at his house, and we had come up with a couple songs, and he was still in high school, and he met a guy who had a drum kit, a guy who was, if I recall correctly, kind of into he was into punk and some kind of like post-hardcore and stuff like that.
Now give me some names real quick, not to cut you up, but give me some names real quick of these gentlemen.
So where I was listening to, the big four, and kind of branching out into as much thrash as I could really get a hold of. My buddy, his name's Sam, awesome guy. I still talk to him. He's actually the same Sam Zerner, who produced our first two records and the third one that we're trying to get, wrapped up, who went on to become just an incredible musician in his own right. But he was into like a lot of more proggy stuff, various prog metal bands of the time, like Dream Theater and Sun Caged was one he really liked. And the drummer, he was into, his name was Mike. And I want to say Mike was into bands like he was into like Glassjaw and Nuclear Rabbit and like Fugazi and stuff like that. Really eclectic, just kind of stuff that you could sort of classify as punk, but not necessarily like British punk or 77 punk or anything like that.
And so after this, right, did you guys obviously start jamming, right? So when did the first project for you come in, like your first original band, and what was the name of it?
So we had a handful of originals, and we saw this really great old campy horror movie called Chug. Have you ever seen it?
Yes, I'm very familiar with
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we are the first incarnation of a real band I had was called Chud Crusher, and that was the three of us.
And you were singing, or Sam was singing, or Mike?
No, we had no vocals. None of us had any idea how to do it, so we never really ever planned what was going to happen, and we had written these songs, and we eventually met a bunch of the guys who became the friends I have today, and some of whom were part of Fog of War and stuff, and other bands in the Bay Area. But after we met those guys, there was a talent show at the high school, and we entered it, and it was funny because we were just these like three guys with long hair and like metal shirts or whatever, and I realize now that our town, Benicia, it's just like a sleepy, just absolute nowheresville in the Bay Area. There hadn't been anything like that since kind of the 80s, and I remember being really surprised how much people seemed to like the music. But it may have been more of a spectacle because we all were headbanging and, windmilling, in sync, synchronized with each other. It was funny. And we did this talent show, and after that, I realized, I was like, man, I gotta do this. It was such a high playing in front of people. But yeah, we didn't have any vocals. We didn't win the talent show either. We lost to an emo band with a vocalist.
Now, walk me through, I guess, that experience for you. Like, obviously, going into the gym or whatever it is, or that you played at the stage for the first time, right? Like, what was that initial reaction? What was that feeling like for you, walking in and being like, "Fuck, we gotta play," sort of thing? Because obviously, it's different from when you're, just jamming in the garage and then you're transforming that into like the live setting. So, what was that feeling like for you?
Well, I remember my hands were shaking so much I could barely hold my guitar up. Like, it's so weird when you're nervous and you start just absolutely braining the music, and you just can't relax. So I'm up there just and these songs were not difficult, mind you. They were not even remotely challenging by any real stretch, not even for our own ability at the time. And it was like you were asking me to do, a one-man orchestra. Like, I felt like that was probably the hardest I've ever tried to play music live, was the first show. And, but once we started and we saw that people weren't, leaving or calling the cops or anything, I kind of loosened up, and we had one song that had kind of this neat kind of like galloping Iron Maiden triplet feel, and people really got into that one. And luckily our friends were there, and they were moshing in front of the stage and stuff. So after we kind of got our feet wet, it wasn't so bad. But I remember feeling like I was going to simultaneously like barf and pass out when I got up under the light, though.
And obviously, you're a tremendous frontman today, but I'm saying you got over it at that point. But I think, for all of us starting, that are for the up and comers that are starting out, like, it's good to hear this kind of what is it? What am I thinking of? The opposite end to being like, more, I guess, in the beginning stages or whatever. It's nice to hear somebody else's like, like this was the worst kind of thing, people can relate to that. So
yeah, and anyone out there, you definitely get over it. It definitely gets better. I wouldn't say it ever truly goes away 100%, but it's one of those things that, like anything, is exposure. You build tolerance, and before you know it, you'll feel right at home after a song or two.
I think you build more confidence in that as well, because I think it takes confidence to obviously get on that fucking stage and do what you do best,
Well, and I've always joked that guys who aren't the front man, at least you don't have to say anything. So having to actually be kind of the face and the voice between songs, that's the real challenge. It's not during the music; it's between the songs.
I've always maintained that I'm getting better. I don't never claim to be the best per se, but I mean, it was challenging at the first moment. But after, I think when I was starting out, I just wanted to own it. I was just like the guy that was like, fuck it, give me the microphone. I'm going to fucking do this. Whether I'm good or bad, I'm going to at least try it out.
That's exactly how I ended up doing vocals too. So yeah.
Much like the podcast, like I never claimed to be good. I just claimed to enjoy it, and I'm gonna fucking do it. Somebody's got to do it, and I'll be the guy. It's fine, And I think with having that mentality, just cemented, and that confidence, I guess, cements, the men from the boys kind of thing. Like everybody can do it. It's just a matter of just going out there and fucking doing it, kind of thing, and having that mentality. Would you agree or disagree?
Oh no, absolutely. You, if you like, in my case, we had blown through like 3 or 4 guys who auditioned for vocals in the first incarnation of Fog of War, and it became pretty evident that I was just going to have to do it. So no, you're absolutely right. Someone needs to do it, and it's best if, you just sort of step up, get it out of the way, sort of pull the Band-Aid off, and you'll sink or swim. And that's usually the, trial by fire, best way to do it.
Absolutely, my friend. Now you mentioned emo bands, right? What time period are we talking about here?
So that must have been 2000 and early 2004.
Wow, so right before Fog of War started, you had played in like a 3-piece, right? And was emo kind of, and I guess metalcore and hardcore, I'll lump all that crap into one, because to me that's what it is. But was that the prevalent thing in the Bay Area around the mid 2000s?
Yeah, there was a lot of it, especially in our town. We had and now looking back, obviously it was great, and I went to a lot of shows there just to see live music. There was a coffee shop in town that hosted concerts, and the majority of the bands there were kind of like emo, alternative. If you really want to get nerdy about it, even like shoegaze kind of stuff. But
okay.
Yeah, that was definitely kind of the thing, and my bassist and I would go, and we were the only dudes there, with metal shirts and whatever, but we just wanted to be around live music, even though we weren't necessarily fond of a lot of it. And to be fair, there were some pretty interesting and unique bands that were really good, that at the time seemed like huge to us because they had bands, and and it ended up being something that kind of fell apart. But we just wanted to be around the music. But the sound at that particular time was definitely not metal and definitely not thrash.
And when did the whole thrash movement come into the fold for you? Like, when did you start noticing new up and coming speed metal bands? Just because obviously the Bay Area, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, the Bay Area is famous for jazz, blues, and then obviously thrash metal. So, when did that kind of come into play for you? When did you start noticing some of the new bands?
So, Fog of War formed in the winter of 2004, kind of from the remains of 2 different bands, my band Chug and then our original bassist Joe's band. They were called Demolitia, and our bands weren't working out for each other, so we decided to try to do something that was a little more in line with what we all kind of agreed we wanted to do, which was basically, Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax, etc. Big Four stuff. So that was 2004. We had been playing shows about a year or so, and I want to say it was either 2005 or early 2006 that we started seeing other bands around. And the first couple bands that we had encountered were Devastator, now known as Blessed Curse, and Hatchet.
Wow. So so those, I didn't realize how how kind of old those bands kind of were. Now, what about them kind of changed the game? I guess it did change the game for at least that specific area, because obviously metalcore was huge, so this was the kind of antithesis of that. It was kind of the opposite. So I'm wondering, I guess, were you three were like some of the only bands kind of doing it around that time? Did you start playing shows with them per se, or would you just start going out to their shows, I guess?
Yeah, it's funny. We were supposed to play a show with Devastator at this place called Bourbon Street Bar and Grill, and anybody who remembers that place will know why I kind of laugh when I say it. But it was it was basically a wannabe Slims in Concord, California, and we were supposed to play a show with Devastator, who ended up having, I think it was like car trouble, van trouble, or whatever, because they were coming down from Fairfax, which is like, I hesitate to even say maybe rural Sacramento. It's kind of out of the way. But they didn't make it. And there were all these guys there who were like into thrash metal and like crossover and stuff. And they were all there to see Devastator. Devastator had kind of made a name for themselves by, getting online quickly and promoting. They were always really good at that. And but we were playing the show, and we're like, well, hey, we're playing, so don't leave. We're also a thrash band. So these guys stuck around, and they ended up being the guys who ultimately formed Zombie Holocaust. Nick and Dan and their original bassist Ricky, and I think their other guitarist Ricardo was there, the first ZH lineup, and a bunch of the guys that had been kind of staples at shows ever since. And that's how we had met Zombie Holocaust as well, playing a show that was supposed to be with Devastator. We caught them as they were getting ready to leave because Devastator canceled. So that was kind of interesting.
And I guess after this initial show, so that must have been a big deal, obviously, for the band's career. But when did you actually start going into the recording studio to like do some demos? And I'm assuming you were handing demos out at that specific show. So let's go back just a little bit and explain to me like the first time that you remember going into a recording studio and what that feeling was like for you guys.
Well, it definitely wasn't a studio, I'll tell you that. It was we cut our first recording in our practice space, which was a warehouse for our bassist Joe's parents' company that they ran. Basically, his folks had a business, and I always joked about not really knowing what they actually did, and I still don't. I don't know what the warehouse was for. I just know there was a bunch of boxes in it, and we would play in there, and that's where we recorded our first go at anything. It was sort of, we never released it with like, any kind of cover art or anything, but it was called the Metal Storm EP. Obviously, we realized later that, Metal Storm was something that Slayer had come up with a long time ago, but it's probably where we got it from. But we were also, a bunch of rowdy, drunk teenagers, so I'm not surprised we accidentally ripped off Slayer, because I think most people do at one point in their career. So.
And what was your singing style around this time? Like, who did you kind of try and sound like? Because all of us vocalists, at one point or another, we all tried to sound like certain guys. So who was yours?
So for me, I was so self-conscious about the way I sounded. I immediately tried to hide behind doing like growls and like more high pitched growls. And if you are, if you look deep enough in YouTube, there's a really, really bad music video we did around this time. And it's got those vocals on it. They're like these high pitched kind of black metal growls. And it was really weird because we were playing this music that was more like thrash and roll, kind of like, a lot of it sounded almost like Tankard, but it had this like high pitched, like shrieking black metal vocals over it, and it was just terrible, and it didn't work. But I was the only one who was willing to step up and do vocals, and I couldn't find my voice, so to speak. So I tried to take the easy route and just growl instead. It was terrible. It was really bad.
And I guess so. Let's go to your first, I guess, main staple of just playing a lot in the Bay Area, right? So you were playing with bands like, I want to say Hatchet and Fog of War, and Zombie Holocaust and all these bands. Like, when did the scene become like super prevalent, where like it was like literally everything was thrash metal?
That I got a specific answer for you there. Pretty much all of 2006. It kind of happened early. We all started, jamming 2004, and then Hatchet formed in 2006, and I think they made it to the second half of the year. But the second half of 2006, there were thrash and kind of like crossover punk. And even like hardcore, the Bay Area still to this day has like some kind of unsung, great hardcore bands. But the last half of 2006, you could go to the Gilman in Berkeley virtually any weekend and see a thrash show. It just exploded. And we used to play these shows, and there'd be, the Gilman's not very big, so it was packed. And it was like every weekend, and it's not surprising to me that it kind of oversaturated itself fairly quickly. But 2006, for being as early on in the thing as it was more or less, I would say, the peak of things. Some of my colleagues might agree or disagree, but at that time, man, it seemed like you couldn't go anywhere in the Bay and not see a flyer for a thrash show. Municipal Waste was taking off at that time. Hazardous Mutation had come out, and it was just like, it just like blew the lid off things. So it was all just really good timing.
And obviously there was a documentary made around this specific time. I'm not sure what year. I know you guys were a part of it because that's kind of how everybody kind of came on my radar, was watching this new wave of thrash metal documentary. And tell me a little bit about that real quick.
Yeah, I remember that. It was this guy, the guy who was doing it, I want to say, and I feel bad not being sure, but I want to say his name was Joe. I think he had like an alias. It was like Joe Maiden or something like that. And he and his buddy, completely out of their own pocket, were going across basically the country, because I think they interviewed bands like in Denver and stuff too. They went all over the country interviewing thrash bands for this new wave of thrash deal, and we were fortunate enough to be on that. Yeah, man, that's crazy, bro. I haven't thought about that in years, but yeah, no, those guys did a great job, and I don't know that I ever saw the finished product. Actually, I'd have to go back and look, but I think I want to say that Tormentor was on there.
Dread was on there, Fueled by Fire, Merciless Death. Like, they were all the big guys were kind of on there. So I was just curious. And you guys were like interviewed at some park or something. So, you even had like Vindicator on there and some bands that I had never heard of before, and it was a crazy like, documentary. It wasn't like the best, but it was still cool that you guys had that. So just like walk me through, did they just say we need a location, and then obviously just interviewed you without any microphones, and and that's kind of like where I got it. It was like a DIY kind of thing, and that's what made it so awesome.
And that's exactly what it was. They hit us up through Facebook, and like everything was done through Facebook at that time, and those guys hit us up, and they just wanted to do an interview, and they just asked, somewhere with a neat kind of, some scenery or whatever. So we went down to this park or something, and it's wide open, and it just I remember doing the interview, but I'm gonna have to go back and watch it because I really don't remember a whole lot about it other than the guys were really cool, and it was definitely something we were happy to be part of because it was, as far as I know, and I could definitely be wrong, the first real attempt at capturing like the new wave of thrash, like not just in one area, but like literally across the country, which was really impressive.
And obviously you mean MySpace, so everyone's hitting you up around MySpace because I don't think Facebook was prevalent around this time.
No, you're right. Absolutely. It was MySpace. Yeah, it's MySpace is such a disaster now. You kind of want to forget about it. No, you're right. It was definitely MySpace where the top 8 or whatever. That was that's how bands.
That's how we discovered
that's how
bands
showed their. That's how we showed our loyalty to each other was the top 8. So we always had Hatchet and Zombie Holocaust up there at the top and stuff because they were our bros. And yeah, it was totally like a pecking order thing. Who's
first, who's second?
This person's top 8. How high are you, man? And it was totally like a hierarchy.
Absolutely. And then you also had Southern California bands that you had Witch Haven and Mutants of War. So, that was my point. Is the documentary isn't showcasing just Bay Area stuff. Like I know the old school was primarily based in the Bay Area, but this movement kind of translated everywhere kind of thing. And I was just generally curious as to like when it came on your radar as far as the albums. Like when did records start? You started seeing like there's more people doing this and making full-length records and getting signed.
Yeah, that was, and it surprised us when we had found out just how many bands were actually excelling at promoting themselves and releasing product and T-shirts and tours and stuff like that, because we were always just so bad at promoting ourselves. And bands like, the biggest one we saw kind of take off quickly was Warbringer, who's obviously kind of as far as thrash goes, a household name at this point. Watching those guys, and we were just like, man, we are not working hard enough. But then, bands like Warbringer and Fueled by Fire, Bonded by Blood, and even Witch Haven. I don't think Witch Haven moved quite as quick as those other guys, but they were definitely on the move too. We realized pretty quickly that the LA scene was where most of the action was this time, and we did our best to kind of try to get on that level. But man, those guys had some great ability in terms of promoting and networking. They just had the patience to do the stuff that ultimately we were just too lazy to do, and we were too busy having a good time. And I don't regret it necessarily, but it was really cool to see these guys do this kind of self-made thing. And then and you look at bands today like Havoc and Warbringer, and how far they've gone, and Hatchet too, definitely, how far they've gone, just kind of on their own motivation. And it's just it's just incredible to see the lengths that people are able to carry themselves when they really put themselves into something.
Absolutely, my friend. And obviously, you had Thrasher to Maya, which was like becoming massive around this point. And so you guys went into the studio around your first EP was Kills on Contact. It was 2006. Now walk me through that whole process real quick.
So that one was also done in our rehearsal studio. Our buddy Sam had, he also did he's pretty much, he's done every recording we've done, I should say. Even if you can find some weird bootleg ones, if there's a recording of us in a non-live setting, he did it. But he had gone to school for audio engineering at SF State, so we were pretty jazzed to have him with us. And we did this quick little EP, which a lot of those recordings, if I'm not mistaken, I think maybe all of them ended up going on our full length, just being remixed and remastered. But I think a lot of the performances are on there as well. So we went in and did this quick little EP, and man, we were stoked. We banged it out in like, I don't know, 2 weeks maybe, and we had it ready to go because we had some shows coming up. This guy, his name was Nuno, and he had this band Adrenocide in the UK. He's the one who did the art for that Kills on Contact EP, that like kind of photoshopped mishmash thing, all scary shit on the cover. But we did that one, and really what that was the beginning of the recordings for our self-titled release, a few years later in 2009. But popped in there, banged it out real quick. I was surprised actually how quickly everything went, and we were ready to take it to the shows we had lined up for the next few months.
Fuck, dude, I can't believe how long ago that was. 2006, dude. That was a long.
Well, yeah, blows my mind, man.
Whew. Let's real quick. So you're obviously your buddy Sam. Was he just getting into like just recording? He just wanted to be like a recording engineer instead of a musician.
He ended up doing both. He's one of the best musicians I've actually ever had the pleasure of working with. I always have a hard time keeping track of which projects he's currently in. He kind of fills in and sort of bounces around, and I'm ashamed to say I'm not actually 100% sure what he's working in right now. I think he's playing in this great kind of melodic technical death outfit called Ontogeny, I think. Don't kill me if I'm wrong, Sam. But anyway, he went to school for it, so it was something that he wanted to do. He liked the music that we liked. Maybe it wasn't what he was necessarily interested in playing, but he understood it was the important part. So we were able to at least be on the same page of what we wanted things to sound like and the energy it was supposed to have. And he ended up being just like our go-to for everything after that, recording wise.
And obviously he captured it, greatly on Fog of War. It's still a classic as far as that era goes. So anybody who's obviously listening to this, Fog of War is just a classic piece for us. Now tell me a little bit about the recording process for this record.
So Fog of War, that one was done, like I said, we had a handful of performances that we wanted to keep from the Kills on Contact EP, and everything we were doing, obviously this is in the new era of recording programs like Cakewalk and Cubase were real big. I think we recorded it in Cakewalk, so you can sort of just take the performances and reamp them and produce them basically in any way you wanted to. So we had these performances, and we figured, let's just use them. And they ended up sounding different enough anyway with the different production treatment it got anyway. So we essentially had like half an album done already. Then we went on to start working on the ones that we had not recorded. And that album was actually completed in 2 parts. There was, at the time, the lineup was myself, Matt O'Connell on drums, Joe Ordery on bass, and John Fryman on guitars with me. At that time, there was a lineup change, and that's when, I was going to say the man who needs no introduction. That was when Wink came on board doing lead guitars, and we did, I want to say 3 songs with Wink. And added those to our kind of collection. And we just said, let's just do it as one album, and we'd obviously put John's name in the credits and included him, as a, visible part of the band and everything, but we released it under that new lineup. So you can actually hear on songs like Fog of War and Death Penalty and Kills on Contact, kind of a production discrepancy versus the rest of the album. They might sound a little bit better because there was a decent block of time between the first recording effort and the final recording effort after which we released the album.
Absolutely, dude. And I just wanted to say real quick to button this all up is that Fog of War, I think, is just a killer track, dude. I mean, I remember hearing this around, it was 2009, 2010, so it was like right when the album came out, and I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, as soon as I heard that scream come out of you, and I was like, this is the band for me. And then obviously the rest of the record is just killer, but I think that kind of set the tone for as far as speed metal for me goes, because Fog of War is one of the first bands I heard from the whole kind of scene. So I was just curious as to, like, I guess, what was the reaction? Did you have more people kind of like myself tell you this, or am I just alone on this? Like, what was the initial reaction when this first came out?
Thankfully, it was positive. We kind of realized pretty quickly on that our sound was different, and we weren't exactly sure what it was. And I definitely don't mean that in some kind of weird superiority complex kind of way, but it occurred to me later that we were just jumping into a lot more melody than a lot of bands were at the time. We just couldn't really put our finger on it because we were just sort of, playing, and that's the stuff that fell out. But we had kind of set ourselves apart, I noticed, when it wasn't just thrash fans coming to our shows. There were a lot of power metal guys that started coming to see us, and now it's a little more clear now that I think about it in retrospect. Just why there were these, power metal and even sometimes like kind of more prog guys coming to our shows, is because we had an element, kind of a melody that not necessarily all the other bands had at the time. Which I've always tried, because I always try to do stuff that gets out of my comfort zone, but invariably I end up coming back to some kind of melodic bass. And I know that now it's just sort of the way I write. But at the time it was really cool because a lot of bands had really heavy and fast music and stuff, but we did these songs that it was just kind of, I felt sort of like, people felt it's almost like closure when you hear it. The song kind of takes you for a ride. It goes up and then it comes down and drops you back off. And we kind of had that with the melody that a lot of bands, it was just kind of heavy and fast the whole way through. We were kind of doing stuff that had, I want to say, almost more color in certain areas, but not that it was necessarily better or worse than anything else, but it was, we couldn't figure it out at the time, but we knew it was different. And now I kind of see why. Definitely just ended up using a lot of melody, which came from like a big Iron Maiden influence. And a lot of people don't know this, but our early stuff was actually really heavily influenced by In Flames before they sucked.
Now walk me through the album cover and kind of like, I know you had done the album cover, but what was give me like the story behind it. Like, what is it supposed to represent? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I knew this question was coming. This one always comes up. So at the time, I had this roommate. His name's Brian Warner, and he ended up being a really awesome artist, kind of doing his own thing. He was my roommate, and we needed an album cover, and he'd always drawn all this neat, like, kind of, it was really like sort of like crossover kind of inspired art and stuff. And we, it was one of those things we didn't want to, honestly, if we're telling the truth, we didn't want to shell out a bunch of money because we didn't have it, for a really great art piece. And we figured, like, hey, well, let's get an unknown artist some exposure. We didn't want to have to, give Ed Repka a call or email, as it were. Not if there's anything wrong with that. His art's always been awesome. And I think my favorite of the, just while I'm touching on it, my favorite of the new wave of thrash artwork that I believe he did was State of Insurgency by Hexen. I really like that one. So my roommate, Brian, he drew this piece, and, honestly, I hit him with so much detail about what I wanted in it. He was a good sport for cramming it all in there anyway, because I've always had a really hard time narrowing down my idea for artwork into something that's actually like digestible, with perspective and the kind of detail you can fit into, a 4x4 piece of paper. And he was a really good sport about it. And I know it's been kind of a divisive thing. If you look at our songs on YouTube, there's a lot of comments about the artwork either being awesome or people not being so into it. It just fit at the time, though. It definitely still does. I don't have any regrets for having that cover on there.
Absolutely, nor should you. It's classic. I was just curious as to the concept of it is all.
Oh yeah, that was it was based off of Kills on Contact, the song, which is basically the idea was scientists are experimenting on a bunch of insects in a lab, and something happens, and through radioactive voodoo, the bugs get supersized and destroy everybody in the lab and take over the earth. Basically a bunch of spiders and praying mantises just running over the planet, destroying humanity and all that stuff. And that's where that cover concept came from.
It always reminded me of and looking back at it, always kind of reminded me of a Mars Attacks kind of thing. If that makes sense.
Oh, totally in that vein. Absolutely, dude. It was so absurd. And I when I wrote the song that inspired that art, the lyrics started off as a joke. They were placeholder lyrics, so I could kind of work out, a vocal rhythm and everything. And the rest of the guys liked it, and I just ended up keeping it, and it ended up being a song about giant bugs.
That's awesome. So let's move forward real quick, right? What were you doing in between, I guess, the 2009 to 2010 era? Because I had known that maybe you guys hadn't been touring for it a whole lot, and I guess I should ask this too. How important was it to you guys to stay independent for this release?
So, all right. So at that time, after we had released that album, we supported it by playing the Bay Area. We did not have the means or the time to do a, actual tour. We all lived away from home, so everybody had rent to pay and just bills, and it sucked because we did want to do, the van up and down the West Coast thing, and we did get to play, a few shows up north and down in LA, and that was always really cool, but we never got to do a proper tour because we all had to work, and we couldn't get away for too long. Not to mention the fact that at the time, two of us were working at the same place too, so that made it even harder. And then at one point, three of us actually, now that I'm thinking about it. But at that time, so yeah, we pretty much just supported the album through Bay Area shows once or twice a month. But from there, it seemed to do all right. We managed to get the album out through online stuff more. A lot of European outlets were kind of interested, like distros and stuff, which kind of segues into the next bit. We had a couple offers, nothing, terribly big, nothing like Metal Blade or, Earache or anything like that. But we did have offers. But at the time, we kind of figured that there wasn't a, we didn't expect this to be the thing that, pays our bills and stuff. So it was about that time we were kind of, coming to that this was something that we did because we loved to do it. And we would have rather kept control over our music than give it to somebody else for some money that might not necessarily be worth it, because then, you know, like I said, we were all working at the time. It wasn't something we felt like we wanted to do, to be able to give up, you know, the rights to the music for X amount of time, or, you know, reprinting rights and things like that. So that actually led us to the reissue that was done on Stormspell Records. That's kind of a little known thing, is Fog of War was actually reissued with different art on Stormspell Records. When was that? I want to say, 2011, maybe 2012 at the time. But we were never really interested in, you know, just handing everything over. Because, again, we didn't get any really major league offers in the first place. So staying independent to us just kind of jived more with what we believed in at the time.
And did you see a bunch of your friends, bands kind of getting, hearing some horror stories or whatever it is, and you kind of just like didn't want to be a part of it kind of thing?
Oh, definitely, man. I mean, Hatchet, it's so far gone in their history now, but Hatchet's first album got picked up by Metal Blade, Awaiting Evil. That album was released through Metal Blade. And the horror story that we had heard is basically Hatchet was doing a tour supporting it, which turned out to be pretty much out of their own pocket. They had very little support from the label, from what I remember. And if I'm wrong, I apologize, but this is how I remember it. And they were in the middle of the country, you know, doing the real deal, like in the shit, like the trenches, doing the shows Tuesday night at a bar in Nebraska kind of deal. Like they were really out there, you know, doing it. And I want to say they had band trouble and just more or less financial trouble, and they got left high and dry and had to figure out a way back home. And that really killed a lot of their momentum, because shortly after that, I think Metal Blade purged a bunch of bands that they had sort of picked up when the thrash thing kind of exploded. They sort of snatched up a bunch of bands that they thought, you know, had any degree of marketability. And there was kind of a purge, and Hatchet was, I believe, amongst them. Either that or they left. I don't totally remember. But from what I remember, there was kind of, Metal Blade had sort of dumped a lot of the bands that they had sort of extemporaneously picked up. And that was kind of a big thing. We saw that, and especially because, again, the whole thing that was going on at the time with us working, and our bassist Joe had recently had his first son, so it wasn't really something that even seemed possible to be able to go tour anyway. So we were kind of making peace with our situation, and trying not to compare ourselves to what other people were doing. But yeah, we did see bands like Hatchet. Warbringer got picked up, I believe, fairly early on, and they got put on such a grueling touring schedule too. It just wasn't something we would have been able to do, even if we had been given that opportunity, which nothing that big came our way, but it's not like we would have been able to do it anyway.
Right. But at least you still kept, I think what I'm going to say here might offend some people, but I'm going to say it anyways. I think once, like, obviously, I think once we got signed or whatever, if Madras got signed, I think the music would kind of hurt. I don't think it would have been as pure. And I think what you guys kind of did is kept more of the music kind of, more pure, I guess, than others kind of thing. Like, it was just like in your face. There's no pressure to write it. It just came out more naturally kind of thing.
Oh, definitely, man. That was totally something we had always talked about, is not rushing the creative process, because in a way, coming to terms with that, we couldn't live that, the lifestyle that, as younger guys, we had always dreamed of, living in the van and doing shows all over the place. And we kind of made peace with that. That wasn't going to happen for us. And, when we did that, it kind of set us free in regards. I mean, anybody who's followed Fog of War knows there are always very large gaps between releasing anything because of the way our lives kind of turned out. And, but on the one hand, you know, there were a lot of bands, and I won't name any names, but there were a lot of bands from, you know, when guys who got picked up by labels who, you know, their first release was just killer stuff, the music they'd been able to take forever to write. And then their second albums kind of ended up lacking in a way because they were under the gun to produce something by a deadline. And artistically, I've always been happy that we never had that. The guys I've, you know, that are in the band always know that I've just been an absolute, you know, tyrant as far as pushing for productivity, you know, during our more active times. But as long as we were, you know, consistently making songs better, I was happy with that. But we were able to work in an environment where there was nobody but us, you know, spurring any kind of forward movement on the songs and stuff. And ultimately, you know, I really feel like that ended up playing to our strengths as songwriters. So not something I'm, you know, again, nothing I really regret there.
Absolutely, man. And obviously, like, you know, you guys still made your mark, dude. In no matter how small or big it was, you guys definitely, you know, are entrenched in that fucking community, and you guys should be proud of kind of what you've done. So, what was some of? Let's go to 2010, the Confessions of a Thrashaholic. So you had to follow up a record. Now, why an EP and not just a full length?
We always had a joke about, you know, you have to do EPs before and after releases. You just have to do these EPs. And really, it was just an excuse to get in the studio and to have art done. And, you know, it was just an excuse to have a good time, basically. So we did Confessions. 2010, I want to say November 2010, I believe, was when we released it. Just a handful of tracks and a goofy cover. I'm glad we did it, though, because the songs on that one ended up being on Here Lies Humanity, but with different structures for some of them. And so that was kind of neat that there's multiple versions, you know, out there structure-wise. So it's kind of neat, and it's sort of a reason for any collectors to have picked it up because it is a different, solely different recording. And unlike the Kills on Contact EP, we did not, you know, reuse any performances from Confessions on our next full length.
Absolutely, man. And talk about the cover real quick. What was the concept behind the cover?
So the cover there, that was, we had all really gotten into crossover over the years, and a lot of our attitude was really, you know, stuff like, we really like the Venice stuff, you know, Cryptic Slaughter, Excel, you know, obviously Suicidal Tendencies, and stuff like Sacrilege BC, all that kind of stuff. So we wanted to do something that was kind of funny. And I remember the same artist, Brian Warner, my roommate, he did the art for Confessions as well. And I just remember we were just shooting the shit, drinking some beers, and we were trying to think of some art. And I don't remember if it was me or Brian, but somebody said something about just like a gnarly thrasher guy, like busting through the Confessions booth and, you know, like throttling some like priest or whatever. And it ended up just being just really fun, which was the whole theme of that release anyway, was just to have a good time. Which I've always loved that cover. It's so silly and simple. I laugh every time I see it.
And I believe like the cover that I have is red. The logo is, but I see like on your Metal Archives for some reason that it's white. I don't know if that's just because you guys wanted to do something different just for the CD version or something cool like that.
Oh, that I think it got released as white before we actually pressed it. But when we pressed it, we decided to do a red logo, which again you'll notice obviously it's a different logo too. We wanted to just for the hell of changing things up, just do a kind of an alternative logo for this little, you know, mini release or whatever. But yeah, that was done. The Metal Archives photo, I think somebody grabbed that off of one of our social media sites, probably before we had actually released it.
And now talk to me real quick, because it was a long time before your second record came out, man. What were you doing in between 2010 to 2015?
So during that time, we had kind of been undergoing a metamorphosis of types with our sound, you know, and the timeline gets a little bit fuzzy, so forgive me, but I got it. So late 2010 was our last show with our bassist Joe when we opened for Forbidden at the DNA Lounge in San Francisco. That's right, late 2010. Around, winter 2010, Joe had too many obligations, you know, at home, and he just couldn't keep up with, you know, the rehearsal demands and everything, and he just had, you know, he had family to take care of, so he, you know, did what was best and decided to take care of his family. So we weren't really sure what to do at that time because Joe had been with us, you know, for such a long time. We weren't sure if we should keep going or go under a different name. So completely on a whim, we're like, hey, you know what? Let's call back John, our original guitarist, and, you know, see if he wants to come back and do 3 guitars. You know, Iron Maiden did it, so why not us? And at that time, John agreed to come back, and we had started really experimenting with a lot of like harmony and way more melody, which obviously going into Here Lies Humanity, you'd be able to tell the difference. But we needed a bassist, and at the time, we were down to asking Sam, the guy who did our recordings, or John's brother, Nick, who was actually a guitarist, but he was such a good guitarist, you know, no question he'd be able to, you know, kind of pick up the bass and make something of it there too. He was such a creative guitarist and just played stuff that you wouldn't really guess to write something like that. So we figured he'd be a good bassist as well. Which obviously he ended up being the guy. 2011, summer 2011, Nick came on board, and from 2011 up through 2014 was a whole just mishmash of a, you know, struggle. We had these songs for a long time, and we had begun recording this record. Man, it was like late 2012, maybe 2013, that Here Lies Humanity had actually been recorded, and you kind of see a similar theme with our third record here in a bit, but it took forever. We had scheduling issues. That was when we had actually finally gone to a real studio setting as well. But we had problems booking time with Sam. We had problems just lining up our schedules to get the guys in to do their parts. The drums and most of the rhythm guitars were done really early on, and it just sort of just dragged on forever, just years of just being unable to finish this thing. And eventually we got it wrapped up, you know, in early 2015. Things finally, you know, came together, and we were able to get this finished product. And that was when we released it, June 6th, 2015.
Wow, dude, that's a long process, my friend. I mean, that just
dude, it was, and I won't shy from it. It was a nightmare, bro. I was, you know, I kind of had, you know, my parts done, and Matt had his parts done for a while, and then the timing of everything just completely went in the shitter, and it just we were just putting the rest of this album together just in scraps at a time. It was absolute torture. And unfortunately, it kind of ended up happening to us again. But I guess that's kind of
we'll get into it. I said we'll get into that part. Don't worry about that. Like, I guess there's just no evacuation as far as that goes, right? You had to get the fucking record done. So,
yeah.
Not to be all punny on you, but it seems like you guys kind of lost a little bit of momentum. Like it's like a sad like what could have been kind of thing if you had released a record, say like 2 to 3 years kind of after the debut. I really was hoping for that, but at least we got something, and Here Lies Humanity, again, is another classic. It's just as great as Fog of War, if not better. In my opinion, this is kind of like my go-to for you guys is Here Lies Humanity. So walk me through the artwork on it.
So at that time, we had, we'd all been working enough to actually have, saved a little bit of money so we could actually spend a little bit on the band at that point. We went to, and I still go to this guy for art, and forgive me if I butcher your name, bro, but his name is Andre, I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Andre Bartulovic. He has a great art production company called All Things Rotten. His kind of online alias is Maggot Master, and he's just a phenomenal artist, and I've been going to him for everything ever since, in this project and other little ventures I've done. But so Here Lies Humanity, the song itself, is basically this concept of humanity's on its last legs, war and infighting and all of our, worst traits have sort of brought us to the brink of extinction. So there's this whole idea to house the remainder of humanity in this like utopian metropolis kind of thing. And everything's run by this sentient AI who's been like set up to like basically be a caretaker. And after watching just how shitty humans can be to each other, the AI sort of justifies a change in its logic that the only way to have peace is if all humans are dead, kind of a thing. And that's how that art came about. That's when the AI decides that it's tired of dealing with humanity's garbage.
Now walk me through, because this is indeed my favorite Fog of War song. So I have to ask, just for my own ego. Walk me through The Glow, because it's really a great fucking song. It's just like the whole there's layers that you did on your vocals where it's like a and it's just like awesome. So like walk me through the whole process of that song in terms of writing.
So The Glow, that one was really heavily influenced by John's writing. He has definitely more of a knack for kind of real solid songwriting, where I tend to just try to make a bunch of like riffs and piece them together. He wanted to do something that was a little bit more of a songwriter's type of thing, something with a chorus. So we've gone in that direction with a couple of his ideas, and we ended up doing this song, and it came out really great. But it needed something, I think, and this was something that was kind of endlessly debated on within the band. But ultimately I was stubborn enough to sort of get my way at that. I wanted some more melodic vocals, and I wasn't able to really pull that off. So, our buddy, Jake, who's now, at the time he wasn't, but now is the frontman for Hellfire, Jake Nunn. He came and did those great melodic vocals that you hear over the top of mine and everything, and it really just sets the song off to me. It might not be everybody's thing, but that song especially, those melodic vocals were what it needed to kind of fulfill at least what I wanted to see it live up to. And fun for anyone who's into old video games or whatever. That song is about the original Fallout, specifically the place in the game called The Glow, which is basically a big radioactive crater.
Wow, that's awesome. So walk me through the reception to this record.
So when we released it, we really weren't sure what people were going to think, because it was definitely, I wouldn't say 100% different from our self-titled, but it was such a big departure from just sort of straightforward thrash, and it sort of started almost edging on like power thrash territory. And we really weren't sure what people were going to think. And, pleasantly surprised to find out that people really dug it. People took to it enough to where, there were people singing along at the shows and stuff. And people had done that with some of the old Fog of War songs, from the self-title. And I kind of always thought, it would just be, oh yeah, people know, these songs from this album, and that'll kind of be it. And but people ended up really getting into Here Lies Humanity, specifically, The Glow and No Evacuation. Surprising to me, the online consensus has been that MK Ultra is the best track from that record. But that was kind of interesting to me, because we were never really satisfied with that song, but it ended up being released and something we could live with.
Absolutely, man. And what is next in terms of Fog of War for you guys? Like, what is next? I know you had mentioned earlier that, there is a third record. Like, what is happening with all that stuff?
Yeah, there is a third record, and it is done as far as, performances go. It just needs to be mixed and mastered. And again, it's just one of those things. Life kind of, comes at you fast, and things don't always go your way. And with this particular band, that's just sort of been our theme as far as releasing music's gone. But it is what it is, and we do have a record. It's done. It's called Battles Beyond, and it's everything down to the art is finished. It just needs its finishing touches. It'll come out eventually, and it's pretty unlikely that we'll be doing any kind of shows to support it or anything. We're kind of in a inert state right now, but when it comes out, I'm looking forward to see how people receive it, because it's in all the ways that Here Lies Humanity was different from Fog of War. Battles Beyond is definitely different from Here Lies Humanity as well.
So in terms of, I guess, your music goes and stuff, and maybe I'm not understanding, but like, what are there any other kind of musical ventures that you haven't delved into that you would like to, I guess, after the Fog of War kind of thing?
Well, after that whole thing, and then everybody kind of moved away. We're a lot further from each other now than we've ever been. Everybody is very split apart. I'm really getting into doing stuff at home. I do have a project that just recently I've been really getting into, just digital production at home with stuff like Bias FX2 and just recording stuff on Reaper. And I've been picking up a bunch of home studio equipment as I go. I am going to be releasing something, and I'm hoping, it's looking like anyway, with the help of Nick, the bassist in Fog of War. I think he's going to be able to provide some bass tracks, and I hate to say it because it feels sacrilegious at times, but especially with everything going on right now, I'm going to be doing something, I think, with drum programming, as it's come so far, the programmed drums. And for now anyway, if I can work out a way to get a live drummer who has studio capabilities, that's I'm open to that as well. But you can actually expect in the next 2 months maybe, something to come out with me and Nick on it. Doesn't really have a name or a direction right now, but I've got some songs, and I've been learning so much about doing this stuff, DIY style, that I've really got no excuse. And especially now, you can't, it's inadvisable, to go rehearse anyway as it is. So trying to comply with all the other, fucking madness that's happening right now, I figured this is just as good of a step as any. So I'll keep you apprised, definitely, because I'll be interested to see what people think.
Absolutely, and I would love to play it on, as everybody knows, Razor Radio is something I do with Andy Ford, who I'm sure you know, a fellow Bay Area guy, and then obviously I can also play it on Poppitt's Corner if given the permission from you guys. So yeah, anything you guys do, man, would love to support. I've always supported Fog of War. You're one of my favorites as far as that whole that era for me, because I was engulfed in it. I was just starting out, but Fog of War was like the band that, you guys are one of my favorites. I would always, and not to kiss your ass because you're on this fucking podcast or whatever, but it's it's the truth. There was a lot of excitement every time I would go see you guys, or any time I would get the opportunity to play with you guys. You were just a cut above the rest for me, and I want to thank you for that influence and everything, and especially your vocal style. I don't think it's enough credit.
Yeah, the vocals, that was something. That was me accepting the fact that I sound the way I sound, and the vocals were. Ended up being something that I ended up being really proud of, actually, because I really just grabbed on to kind of a Sean Killian, the Vio-Lence influence, and sort of ran with that, and that's sort of been my thing ever since.
That's awesome, man. Well, Josh, thank you very much again for giving me the opportunity to conduct this interview with you. Please tell us some links before I let you go.
Yeah, if you want to check out our music, everything that we've ever released is available on our YouTube channel, Fog of War Thrash. You can still find us on Facebook. It's not terribly active these days, but, go ahead and give us a follow. Scroll through some old posts. We got some funny videos in there. Something new will eventually crop up. When is anybody's guess, but it's one of those things. Fog of War is like a, dirty penny will always turn up somewhere.
Love it, my friend. Well, thank you very much again for the opportunity. I really appreciate you telling your story and us getting to learn more about not only Fog of War, but the Bay Area scene. And another edition of Poppitt's Corner, another episode. I'm out of here, guys. Cheers.